Go away. I don't need this.
I know, but you were becoming a celebrity. You were leading the competition. I guess it was almost, inevitable.
So anyway, he peeled off after a while, and I was on my own. So around the first tone point, around the second, and then on the last leg, and conditions were just worse and worse and worse. And I ended up making a tactical error. I was getting low. I thought, I don't think there's going to be much chance of more lift. But the other class gliders, the standard class gliders, a whole heap of them suddenly arrived all around me. And the air was buoyant, but not really properly thermic. And I just got distracted and messed around with it, whereas stupidly, in retrospect, I should just have had my altitude, just glide on as best glide angle, maximize distance. That's what I should have done and didn't do. So I ended up landing in a field below. And then the nervous wait to see how the kilometers, because it was a distance day rather than a speed day, how the points stacked up. And it ended up my cushion of points was sufficient, although I lost some, not as many as I thought. And I was indeed world champion, which was wonderful.
Oh, that must have been fabulous. A remarkable achievement. The first British victory for many years, I believe.
Yes, Philip Wills won the previous, who was the father of British gliding, really, you could call him. He won the single-seater world title in Spain in 1952. There was a two-seat victory. Nick Goodhart, senior naval officer glider pilot, he actually won the two-seater class in 1956, but single-seat, yes, 52.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, I'm just, before I ask you to describe the marvelous celebrations, it sounds like you had a really good ground crew working with you. So they must have taken a good chunk of the responsibility for ensuring that you were in a position to show your skill and win the competition.
I'm glad you made the point, Nick, because ground crew is absolutely essential. A good ground crew at world championship level, where the pressure is on, the tension, all the expense, the backing, you're representing your home country. There's a lot of pressure. It's a pressure cooker. And a good ground crew will make sure that everything just runs seamlessly. The glider is prepared in good time. It's towed out to its designated position in the takeoff sequence in good time. And all the pilot has to do is, if it's a hot country, stay in an air-conditioned room, look at the map, think about the tasks, weather forecast, likely start time, all of that sort of stuff, and relax, and then just go out in an air-conditioned car to the front of the glider and transfer from the car into the glider and ready, and just get the mind and the little butterflies settle down. Good to have butterflies, that's good, but not too many. Ready for the off. Yeah, good ground crew. And when the chips are really down, they can be tremendously helpful. For example, if I had done what I should have done on that last contest day and glid out for maximum distance, the crew were down there and I'm in radio contact with them, and they could have picked me up by binoculars easily and then just looked at the fields for me as I'm progressing along. They're ahead of me and I see them and the trailer, I see the field. And they look at all the hazards and everything. You say, no, that one's fine. No, I can get further. Okay, move on. The next one. Yep, that's okay too. And you can just do, instead of a normal thing, which is inspecting the field and everything else, using precious altitude before you commit, they've done that work for you. And you can just do a straight onto finals approach.
Sounds like coordination was vital, but I'm sure they, as well as you, enjoyed the celebrations. Now you had become the world champion.
It was quite a party that night, put it that way, Nick, and it went on very late. and at that time, again, not just because I was a bit of a loner, because getting sleep is a challenge in its own right when you go to all these different countries, and maybe you're not sort of person that can go to sleep on the head of a pin. I had a tent actually over on the far side of the airfield, away from all the Olympic Village, if you will, all the noise and everything else. I was over way away and all among the trees and the birds. And I do recall after that party finally retiring, and the sky was starting to lighten and the birds were calling. And I thought, oh, well, not much point in going to bed. We had a team manager who was a wonderful, wonderful man. He really was. And he was over the moon about the whole thing. And Maren, who was heavily pregnant at that time was in Norway. And he actually arranged for team funds to get her over to join in the celebration. So she flew over from Oslo to Helsinki, and he arranged for a light aircraft, would you believe, to pick her up there and actually fly her to the airfield at Reiskjella. So bless her, she was there for the whole thing.
Oh, that's marvelous. What a lovely chap. Before long, I guess you were back to your day job on the Phantoms. It must have been an incredible change of pace from flying a glider compared with the Phantom, and two, having been in a world competition, back to the daily grind of squadron life.
It was hard, I guess, but I had enough time on the F4 by that stage. So the Czech flight went smoothly, it went well, and I was back into the thick of it. So I don't recall any particular problems, no.
Well, that's brilliant. And that was around the time, I think, you were now regularly going to armament practice camps where we would do our annual requalification in air-to-air gunnery in the early days in Malta and then Cyprus. I think I was probably not far from joining the squadron. I might even have been on the squadron at this point. Out in Cyprus, I definitely recall a couple of events. The first was your remarkably high air-to-air score, which is something I don't think that had been achieved before. And the other was a marvelous demonstration of the power of the gun we were using in front of the troops there over on the cliffs at Cyprus. Do you remember that?
Vaguely. But if I can just back up one, the first exposure to going away somewhere far in the Phantom was actually on 6th Squadron, when we went all the way out to Singapore, to Tengah Airfield in Singapore, via Dubai and Ghan in the Indian Ocean.
That's a long way.
A long way, and this was again, I'm a first tourist. I had no idea about this stuff. I found out how uncomfortable an ejection seat is after 4 or 5 hours, that's for sure. But I do, certain pressure moments on that trip I stick vividly in my memory. One is the pressure of actually getting plugged in on the air-to-air refueling slot that was a designated piece of airspace over France initially. And the weather wasn't great, so there was a bit of turbulence and yeah, a lot of pressure, because if you don't make that connection, you know, you're in a bit of trouble. Anyway, that was the first one. And then over Cyprus, the next plug in from memory, as the sun was coming up over the horizon, it was perfectly oriented that we were closing in on the basket straight into this rising sun. And the eyes were feeling rather tired by that stage, shall we say. And then the next one, because it goes on, was after landing at Dubai, after all the cold soak at altitude, local time, it was stinking hot in Dubai. So we landed, turned off the active runway onto the parallel taxiway, hit the lever to open up the canopy, wouldn't open.
Oh, dear.
Wouldn't open. I thought, oh, no.
Well, you'd have started cooking pretty quickly, wouldn't you?
Very, very quickly. I thought, this is actually quite serious. So I slowed right down and we did everything we could think of, pushing on the canopy, you name it. And finally, I guess it warmed up enough or whatever and relented and it opened and we were in, a lather of sweat. But anyway, that was a good outcome, I guess. And then the next leg into Ghan was also interesting because, again, a cold soak at altitude for a long time, letting down to an airfield in the middle of the Indian Ocean with warm tropical air. There was a real misting problem on the letdown. So one had to stop periodically, lots of power, and open the system up fully to let it clear, and then down a bit more. And this carried on. And we didn't have a lot of fuel. So I was getting a bit nervous. But anyway, that all worked out pretty good. And then finally, the flying out of Singapore over the Malaysian jungle, low-level missions, down really seriously low level. We're talking about fully tropical air, very hot, very humid, having to have the air conditioning set right up to an uncomfortably warm level to avoid warming, to avoid misting up. So I'm a fairly skinny guy, but I reckon I lost pounds on every one of those sorties. He came back and the flying suit was just absolutely soaked, completely soaked. But I'm sorry to drag this one out, but this was my first exposure to so much. And the highlight of that whole trip, there was a requirement for a pair of F4s to go from Tenga up to and let down and land at Hong Kong's Kai Tak. And that was, I thought, wow. And the boss was in the lead of this pair, and he chose me as number 2, which was, I felt, a great honor. So up we went with our tanker support all the way up to Hong Kong. The tanker stayed in the overhead circling around in case we had a problem and needed to plug in and get fuel and divert to Manila. Fortunately, that didn't happen. So we let down, and the dear old Kai Tak, the threshold on runway 13, that's the southeasterly runway, of course, is displaced considerably so that aircraft coming around the famous corner are sufficiently high, not only to miss the high-rise flats, but also there was a flyover just before the airfield boundary. And one needed to have adequate clearance over that. But because the F4 had, as you remember, Nick, pretty appalling brakes that were designed for carrier operation and not much else. And we had a brake chute that occasionally failed and fell out like a bundle of dirty laundry out the back. So yeah, that was no good at all. The boss landed, of course, first, and he got onto the parallel taxiway. And I came in behind. And the landing itself, the old heart rate was right up there, that's for sure. And my backseater, I don't think he was watching the airspeed too much. He was looking out at the apartments going by, and every 100 feet lower we went, his voice went up another octave. I'm focused out front. So anyway, that all worked well. And then to share the goodies around, another pair of crews were flown up by Hercules, and they flew the F4 back down to Tenga. And the boss and I were flown back to Singapore by Cathay Pacific 707 business class. How nice.
Oh, very nice. And very rare in the Air Force to let you move up from economy.
So that was the first time I flew in a 707 as a passenger. And I recall looking out the windows and seeing these engine pods doing extraordinarily interesting maneuvers and feeling, wow, I guess the engineers knew what they were doing. It looked pretty distressing.
Brilliant then. So let's go back to air-to-air gunnery. Those two events I recalled. What was that like? 92.5% air-to-air gunnery score? Fabulous.